Let's start the third and final session today. Third and final session titled Faults. We're having a look at what faults can arise in the shamatha practice. The program for this session will begin with a meditation. We'll go back to the shamatha practice, observing thoughts. We'll then follow that with a short review of some of the earlier points from the earlier session. Then we'll look at what's called the 5 faults and how to overcome them with the 8 antidotes. And within those 5 faults, we'll look in more detail at the fault, the twin pair of laxity and excitation, what they are and how to deal with them. And then we'll look at some stages of progress in the shamatha practice that we go through. Then we'll go back to that meditation, observing this time emotions, a slight variation of the observing thoughts meditation, and then question answer at the end of the session. We'll begin with this shamatha practice, observing thoughts. And so here we saw in the text earlier that we are to simply, when we're observing in this way, observing the mind, whenever thoughts arise, simply recognize each one, meaning just observe thoughts, any thoughts that are arising. But here, remember, the word thought is a generic term, meaning not only thinking, but actually all conceptual activity. So it's including emotions, memories, mental images, and so forth. And as we saw earlier, the recommendation is to have the eyes at least slightly open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. You can have them naturally open if you prefer. And what the two sort of imbalances here are dullness and distraction. The technical terms for those are excitation and laxity, as we're going to see later in the text in this session. And what can be helpful here is if you notice any agitation, tension, distraction, then lower the gaze slightly, bring the gaze downwards. That can help bring the mind down a little bit. Or if you find yourself falling into dullness, drowsiness, or laxity, then elevate the gaze, maybe even looking straight ahead. So elevating the gaze can help to overcome any dullness as well. So you might like to experiment with the level of your gaze, depending on whether you're getting just agitated, distracted, or dull and drowsy. And then another quintessential instruction in this observing of thoughts, this shamatha practice, is without distraction, without grasping, meaning not to grasp onto any of the mental events arising in our mind. And so in this practice, to have no preferences. In this practice, we're not trying to make the mind still. So whether there's thoughts there or no thoughts, that's equally okay. And if there's good thoughts versus bad thoughts, equally okay. We're not trying to get rid of bad thoughts and increase good thoughts. So whatever's there, good thoughts, bad thoughts, no thoughts, all equally okay. And so have no preferences for what is appearing in the mind. Just observe whatever's there. Now, if you find yourself getting constantly caught up in your thoughts and emotions and getting swept away all the time, you might like to experiment with anchoring yourself in the breath, particularly the rhythm of the breath. Meaning that if you're getting caught up and distracted a lot in this practice, then go back into the body and focus on the rhythm of the breath. Just noticing the rhythm of your breath. Have that as your main focus. And then a little bit in the corner of your mind, noticing your thoughts and emotions. In that way, you can anchor yourself in the breath and not get swept up so much. So you might like to experiment with anchoring in the breath if you're getting caught up a lot. Let's do that practice now. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Simply allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And preparing the mind, setting it into a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Allowing the eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you, keeping the eyes soft and relaxed. Blink as often as you need. And now bring your attention to your own mind and observe your own mind and whatever is arising in the space of the mind. Without following thoughts, without trying to get rid of thoughts. Simply be like an impartial observer or witness, observing thoughts and other mental events as they arise and pass. Having no preferences, whether there's good thoughts, bad thoughts, or no thoughts, all equally okay. Whatever's there, observe it. If you find that you're caught up in any agitation, tension, or distraction, then lower the gaze, releasing any tension, relaxing completely. And if you've got swept away in a distraction, then release the distraction and very gently return to observing the mind. And if you're finding that you're falling into laxity, dullness, or drowsiness, then elevate your gaze and sharpen your focus. And if you're finding that you're constantly getting caught up in your thoughts and emotions and getting swept away, then go back and anchor yourself in the breath. That is, focus mainly on the rhythm of your breath. Have that as your main focus. And just a little bit in the corner of the mind, observing any thoughts that are arising in the mind. And we can bring the meditation to a close. We're now in the main part of the text, which is describing the Sutra Mahamudra practice. And we saw there in Sutra Mahamudra, there are two main aspects to this practice. There's first the shamatha practice and then the vipassana practice. And today and tomorrow, we're looking at the shamatha practice in terms of the preparation and the actual practice. And next weekend, we'll be looking at the vipassana practice of emptiness. In the preparation, which we've just finished, we looked at the 6 prerequisites, 6 things to the outer and inner conditions to set up for an effective support for this shamatha practice. And then the 6 preparatory practices, what the things to do at the beginning of each meditation session. And we saw there in the 6 preparatory practices that part of that is preparing body, speech, and mind. And that is the 7-fold bodily posture we looked at. Preparing the speech, we can use the 9-round breathing exercise, or another variation is just focusing on taking 3 deep breaths. Here at this level, again, this breathing exercise at this point is to, as it says here, to refine the awareness, to really let go of any agitated negative states of mind, to bring the mind into a neutral state, so that we have a good basis then for being able to cultivate a virtuous pure mind of going for refuge and generating bodhicitta. And then to the profound path of Guru Yoga, particularly making requests for the Guru to help us, to inspire us in the practice, and then to dissolve the Guru into ourselves. And in that way, really to uplift the mind, to make the mind joyful and uplifted and clear and focused. And this will put the mind in an optimum state for the actual meditative practice. And so here in the actual shamatha practice, we saw in the last session that it said here that the concentration to be accomplished here is a concentration possessing two aspects, a vivid clarity and a non-discursive single-pointedness. So not only do we want to have stable attention, i.e. to be able to focus single-pointedly, not to become distracted from the object, but we also want to focus very clearly on the object, so overcoming laxity or dullness. But here we added a third quality that we don't see here mentioned in this text, and it's not mentioned so often in any of the shamatha, original shamatha texts, because again, I think it didn't need to be emphasized centuries ago. But the reality in our modern world is we need to emphasize this relaxation, because due to our modern lifestyle and busy lifestyle, we have a lot of agitation and tension and our minds are very chaotic. And whenever we want to focus on something, we apply a lot of tension, and we tend to bring this into meditation practice. And then because when we're distracted, we think we got distracted because we're not trying hard enough. So we try even harder. We clamp down even more forcefully on the meditative object. And then we have all sorts of problems. We get completely exhausted. We get very agitated, and it won't work. And so the first thing we really need to do is emphasize relaxation. And it's something that many of us in the modern world have forgotten how to do because of our lifestyles. We're wound up pretty well the whole day, every day. And we tend to oscillate between, when we're focused, we tend to be very tense. And when we actually do relax, we tend to sort of be very drowsy and sleepy. So what we're trying to do here is combine those two. We're trying to be very relaxed and at the same time alert. So first establish a basis in relaxation, and then we can improve stability and clarity of attention. And to really highlight the importance of establishing the basis in relaxation, I'd like to again read from this Attention Revolution from Alan Wallace on page 14, and he says the following. He says, thus our practice of mindfulness of breathing, so he's using that as the shamatha practice, consists of prolonging our awareness of our breath. While this requires an alert mind, such concentration should not be tense, but rather balanced. When we discover that we've become distracted from the meditative object, it may feel natural to clamp down more forcefully, tightly concentrating the mind. You can see this in the facial expressions of people who try to concentrate in this way. Their lips become pursed, their eyebrows draw together, and their foreheads become furled with wrinkles. They're becoming concentrated, but like orange juice, most of the fluidity is being drained from their minds. If you want to concentrate for a short time and don't mind the side effects of tension and fatigue, you can follow the above strategy. But if you want to follow the path of shamatha, you'll need an alternative. I had to discover this fact through experience. During my first extended shamatha retreat, I was filled with enthusiasm. I wanted to take full advantage of the rare opportunity that was before me, for I was meditating in India under the guidance of the Dalai Lama. I had no financial worries, and my material needs were easily met. All I had to do was put the instructions into practice. I threw myself into this training with all my might. Each morning, I would rise at 3:30, except once I slept in until 3:45 and got upset with myself for slacking off. Enthusiastic I was, but so uptight. The Tibetan manuals on shamatha meditation that I had studied over the years stated that the type of attention needed when one began such practice was, quote, highly focused. So I tried as hard as I could to keep my mind from wandering. Within a matter of a few weeks, devoting many hours each day to meditation, I could sustain my attention on my chosen object for up to half an hour. I was elated by making such fast progress. As the weeks went by, however, I found myself becoming more and more fatigued. I was draining myself both physically and mentally. My joy in the practice was diminishing accordingly, and I felt my attention was not developing any further. What was wrong? I was trying too hard. The cultivation of shamatha involves balancing the mind, and that includes balancing the effort exerted in the practice with relaxation. I think this points to a cultural difference between traditional Tibetans living in the highlands of Tibet and modern people leading fast-paced lives. Their senses constantly bombarded by telephones, email, the media, and noise. Years of such existence conditioned the nervous system and mind in ways that might have been considered torture in rural Tibet. One traditional Tibetan whom I know once commented on people living in the West. So now he's quoting the Tibetan doctor who says, from the perspective of Tibetan medicine, you are all suffering from nervous disorders. But given how ill you are coping remarkably well. Back to Alan Wallace now. He says, whether we dwell in Boston, Buenos Aires, Berlin, or Beijing, our minds are conditioned to be more high-strung and engaged in compulsive thinking than the minds of Tibetan nomads and farmers living a century ago. So when Tibetan meditation manuals advise beginners to focus their attention firmly, the instructions are aimed at a very different reader than the average city dweller in the 21st century. Before we can develop attentional stability, we first need to learn to relax. So relax, relax, relax. This is the basis. And so we'll move on in the text now. And the next part of the text says, such an authentic shamatha arises from a single pointed concentration of the desire realm of one who has the basis of a non-equipoised mind. Non-equipoised mind here means not balanced, meaning that on the basis of an unbalanced mind, on the basis of a mind that's caught up in dullness and distraction, then on that basis, we can go on to, as we're going to see later, develop this single pointed concentration. And then that single pointed concentration can lead to authentic shamatha. And we'll look at this 9-stage model, the classic model we see in the handouts for this retreat, how to move along these 9 stages to shamatha. And here we have a quote that says, as said by the protector Maitreya, it arises from its causes, it meaning shamatha, relying on applying the 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. So let's have a look at what these 5 faults are and what are the 8 antidotes. The first fault is laziness. And so like everything in our life, if we see no benefit in an activity, then we're going to be very lazy when it comes to doing that activity. So similarly, if we don't appreciate the benefits of this shamatha practice, we're going to be very lazy when it comes to doing the practice. So therefore, to overcome that laziness, first thing we need to do is to reflect on the benefits of the practice so we can develop faith in the practice, faith that this practice is going to bring us a lot of benefit. And then once we've developed faith in the practice, that will lead us to wanting to do the practice, to aspire to do the practice, the second antidote. And then the more aspiration we have to do the practice, the more enthusiasm and effort we'll actually put into the practice. And then the more enthusiasm and effort we put into the practice, the more we'll have this pliancy. And this pliancy here is flexibility and serviceability of body and mind. Now our body and mind are not very flexible or pliant. We have a lot of aches and pains in the body, and we have a lot of resistance in the mind to this practice. But as we go deeper into the practice, both our body and mind become very flexible and serviceable. And we'll look at what that pliancy really means in the context of shamatha tomorrow. So these are the 4 antidotes for laziness. And here we have a quote from Tsongkhapa regarding this. He says, if you cannot stop the laziness of being disinclined to cultivate concentration and of enjoying things that are not conducive to it, from the outset, you will not gain entry into concentration. So again, if we haven't really appreciated the benefits of the concentration, and particularly if we still have this view that the source of my happiness is coming from out there, then we're going to be very lazy when it comes to meditating, because we're just going to be wanting to go and chase after some more sense pleasures because it seems to really give us happiness. And so again, we can see here that as part of an effective strategy to overcome laziness, the common preliminary is important, particularly this fourth one, the view of genuine happiness, that if we can really appreciate source of happiness is not out there, it lies within our own mind. And this shamatha practice is the key that opens the gate, the door to this genuine happiness. Then we're going to have a lot of faith, aspiration, and enthusiasm, and put a lot of effort into this practice. So that's the first fault, has 4 antidotes. The second fault is forgetfulness. And here the antidote to that is mindfulness. And if we jump ahead a little bit in the text, regarding mindfulness, the text just a little bit ahead says, station the guard of non-forgetful mindfulness so that the mind that is unwaveringly still does not become distracted. So this word mindfulness is coming from the original Sanskrit term smrti or the Pali term sati. And both of these terms literally mean to remember, to not forget the object, to be able to hold the object, to not forget it, to not become distracted. So it's defined, mindfulness is defined as the faculty of sustaining voluntary attention continuously upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. And here we find that way of defining also very in the great master of Sangha from the 4th century, from the Mahayana tradition. And he says, what is mindfulness? It's the non-forgetfulness of the mind with respect to a familiar object having the function of non-distraction. What we need to be aware of here is that in a lot of modern day mindfulness traditions, the word mindfulness has been redefined to mean something a little bit different. And often in modern day mindfulness traditions, it's defined as something like a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. A very good thing to do, but this is not really how the word mindfulness was originally defined. So we need to be aware of this difference. So by mindfulness means to remember the object and not to forget it. So that's how we overcome forgetfulness. Then the third fault is this pair of laxity and excitation, which is the technical term for dullness and distraction. And the antidote to that is introspection. And in the text regarding introspection, a little bit later, it says, it is necessary to set up introspection like a watcher to be aware of whether or not the mind is moving elsewhere due to the strength of mindfulness having become weak. So introspection is like quality control. Mindfulness is holding the object, remembering the object. Introspection is monitoring the mindfulness. Are we still focused on the object, or are we starting to become dull or distracted? So it's really quality control. And here, introspection is defined as the mental faculty of having the function of monitoring the state of one's body and mind. And we see that reflected in from Shantideva from the 8th century, great Indian master. He says, in brief, this alone is the definition of introspection, the repeated examination of the state of one's body and mind. In particular, in shamatha, it's noticing if we are falling into dullness or distraction. This is the main role of introspection in shamatha. But also introspection is to monitor the body, because if we don't have a good posture, if we're bending over, we're going to get very dull. So we have to also monitor that a little bit in the meditation practice. But the main role here is monitoring, noticing if we're falling into dullness or distraction. I'll go through the other 2 faults and antidotes, and then I want to look at laxity and excitation in much more detail. So the 4th fault is non-application, and that is that we've actually noticed we've become dull or distracted, but we don't do anything about it. We allow the dullness and distraction to continue. So that is a fault. So the antidote is application, means fix it. If you've become dull or distracted, fix it. And generally that would mean simply reapplying mindfulness to the object, focusing on the object clearly again. And then there's a fifth fault called over-application, which is not such a big issue for us as beginners, but it can become an issue as we go further and further in the shamatha practice. And that is the case where we're actually focusing well on the object, but we're unnecessarily putting effort to adjust the focus. That's a fault. And so the antidote to that is equanimity. And here equanimity means balance. It means our mind is already balanced, so just leave it as it is. Don't unnecessarily apply effort to adjust the focus when we don't need to. So the saying here is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So let's now have a look at these two main imbalances of laxity and excitation in more detail. And here we can use the color diagram, the shamatha diagram that's part of your handouts that we'll be using shortly, as also to look at the 9 stages that we go through to achieving shamatha. And here we see the elephant is the mind, and the black color is symbolizing this laxity or this dullness. And here Tsongkhapa in his Lam Rim text, he defines laxity. He says, laxity means that your mind's way of apprehending the object of meditation is slack. It does not apprehend the object with much vividness or firmness, meaning our mind is sinking. We're not focusing on the object clearly. And we can talk about here in shamatha practice 3 levels of laxity, 3 levels of sinking. Coarse laxity is where our mind is sinking so much that the attention mostly disengages from the object due to insufficient vividness. Extremely coarse laxity would be our mind sinks so much that we actually fall asleep in meditation. But coarse laxity is where it's sinking to a point where we're hardly registering the object at all, because our mind is becoming very dull and drowsy. Then a medium level of laxity is where the object is actually appearing, but it's not very vivid or clear. There's something there, but not so clear. And then subtle level of laxity is where the object actually appears very clearly and vividly, but our attention is slightly slack. It's not sharp enough yet. So we go through, as we move through these 9 stages to shamatha, well, in the beginning stages, we're dealing with very coarse laxity, but then as we move through the stages, we're refining the mind even more and more, eliminating more and more subtle levels of laxity as we move towards shamatha. How to remedy laxity? So initially, if laxity is not so heavy, if we're just starting to sink a little bit, then again, quoting Tsongkhapa, he says simply tighten your apprehension of the object and continue meditating. So if you find your mind sinking a little bit, then just sharpen your focus, particularly on the in-breath, and just keep doing that. But if you find that you're sinking very heavily and you find the sharpening is not working, then the backup strategy is that you shift your focus from the object, and instead you cultivate yourself by, you inspire yourself by cultivating delight, by maybe very briefly reflecting on the benefits of this practice and the fact that you've got a precious human life and you want to make it meaningful and so forth, to really uplift the mind because it's sinking, probably because you've lost interest in the practice. This is one of the most common remedies, common faults, reasons for laxity is sinking, is we just lost interest. So we need to uplift the mind, inspire ourselves. But if that's not even working, then the sort of the backup strategy, the last strategy is we need to stop meditating. I hear Tsongkhapa says, suspend your cultivation of concentration, get up from your meditation, clear away laxity and resume your meditation. And he says, in this regard, a Sangha suggests such activities of going for a walk and washing your face with water, splashing some like cold water on your face. So that's sort of the last resort to stop the meditation. So we wouldn't want to be stopping the meditation every time our mind starts sinking. So again, the first line strategy is simply sharpen your attention on the object. If that's not working, then we need to inspire the mind, because our mind is not interested so much anymore. Uplift the mind. If that's not even working, stop the meditation and go for a walk, splash some water, come back and start again. And so here again, Tsongkhapa says, here is the most important remedy for stopping laxity. When you reflect on the benefits of bodhicitta and the great significance of attaining leisure, it should have a bracing effect on your mind. But he says, this depends on your having had experience with discerning analytical meditation on these beneficial topics. In other words, we have to have done these sort of meditations with the common preliminary practices, to reflect on precious human life, to reflect on bodhicitta and so forth, and through these preliminary practices. If we haven't done that, then we're just going to lose interest in this practice. We're going to sink. So therefore, again, we see really the importance of preliminary practices such as precious human life, view of genuine happiness, and also bodhicitta motivation, that this will really keep us interested and uplifted, the mind sharp and clear in our meditation practice. And then we go to excitation. And here the chart, the description says, the monkey is the proliferation of thoughts. So the monkey is just discursive thoughts in general. And the black color symbolizes excitation. And excitation is the most common form of distraction. It's when we're pulled away by something pleasant. And so this is what we see from Tsongkhapa. He says, what is excitation? It is an unquiet state of mind considered a derivative of attachment and pursues pleasant objects and acts as an impediment to shamatha. So again, we tend to get distracted because we're pulled away by something pleasurable, exciting, pulled away from the meditation object. And so similarly here, we can talk about 3 levels of excitation. Coarse excitation is where we get completely distracted from the meditative object. A medium level of excitation is where we start to get pulled away, but we're still holding on to the object a little bit. And so we see here, involuntary thoughts occupy the center of your attention, while the meditative object is displaced to the periphery. So we're really getting pulled away by some sort of distraction, and we're mainly focusing on the distraction, but somehow a little bit still in the corner of mind, we're still holding on to the object a little bit, focusing on the object. That's medium excitation. Subtle excitation is the reverse of that, where we're mainly focusing on the object, but a little bit in the corner of the mind, there's some things going on in the mind, some little distractions that are starting to pull the mind a little bit. That's subtle excitation. So like laxity, we go through these eliminating more and more subtle levels of excitation as we move along these 9 stages. That first, we'll be having to deal with coarse excitation, where we get completely distracted from the object. Once we start to overcome that, then the mind will start to get pulled away a lot, and we'll overcome that. And then mind will get pulled away just a little bit. We're still holding mainly the object, and eventually eliminate all levels of excitation. How to remedy excitation. So again, first line approach, if we get a little bit of agitation, or a little bit of agitation distraction, then again, Tsongkhapa says, draw in the scattered attention, fix your attention upon the object of meditation. So as we've seen in the meditation, first thing to do when we notice we're distracted, relax, release the distraction, and return to the object. So keep doing that. But if you find that you're just constantly getting distracted all the time, our mind is very agitated, then we need to, again, calm the mind, bring it down. So shift from the object and calm it by bringing impermanence to the mind, particularly in terms of the things that we are chasing after, to understand that these things are transient. They're never going to satisfy us. So why chase after them? To really bring down the mind, and to also impermanence in terms of understanding that this precious human life is not going to last forever. And we want to make our life meaningful, and not to get distracted by all this meaningless stuff. And so then we can bring the mind down from this agitated, disturbed mind, distracted mind. If that doesn't work, then like extreme laxity, then we need to stop the meditation and work on overcoming that excitation. So here, Tsongkhapa says, it is crucial that you relax the meditation for a while and cultivate a sense of disenchantment rather than attempting to pull in your mind and direct it back to the object of meditation every time it becomes distracted. So here, sense of disenchantment is again all about the common preliminaries, the view of genuine happiness, the unsatisfactory nature of samsara, that to be disenchanted by that all of these things that are constantly pulling us away, they're not the source of any genuine happiness. They're never going to satisfy and fulfill us. And to become disenchanted with this mind of excitation, which is getting attracted by all of those things out there. And so then really to subdue the mind so that we can return to the meditation. So again, what we see here for excitation, as with laxity, the importance of these common preliminary practices. So if we really want to be able to reduce the likelihood of laxity and excitation arising in shamatha practice, but also be able to deal with them much more effectively in meditation, then it's very important to have a solid foundation in these common preliminary practices. And they will help us enormously here in this shamatha practice. And then if we go on in the text, the next part of the text says, thus it is taught that shamatha is accomplished through the 9 mental abidings arising from applying the 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. So by using those 8 antidotes to abandon those 5 faults, we can move along these 9 stages to shamatha, which we see here very nicely drawn in this color diagram, which is one of your handouts that you have. And the 9 stages mentioned here are starting with directed attention up to attentional balance. But then the text goes on to say as well, moreover, in his treatise on the grounds, Arya Sangha states that the 9 mental abidings are accomplished by the 6 powers and the 4 mental engagements. So these 6 powers are what enable us to continue to move further and further along these 9 stages. For example, to get to stage 1, we first need to hit the power of hearing. We need to hear about the instructions, what to do, how to do the practice, so that we can enter into the practice and get to the first stage. And then to get from the first stage to the second stage, the power of thinking, that we need to reflect on the practice, to better understand the practice, to become more enthusiastic about the practice. We can go a bit further. And then through the power of mindfulness, improving our ability to hold the object, we can go on to further stages, stages 3 and 4, and then improving our ability, our quality control, picking up more and more subtle levels of laxity and excitation. We can go even deeper and further onto stages 5 and 6. And then through the power of enthusiasm, we can go even much further through stages 7 and 8. And then through the power of being completely familiar with this practice, we can move on to stage 9. And then the 4 mental engagements is how we actually engage on the object. And I'll describe those as we go through the 9 stages. And so that's what I'd like to do now, is start by looking at the first 4 stages, and then tomorrow we'll complete the 9 stage. So if you've printed out that shamatha diagram, that's very good. You can have it in front of you. Otherwise, here I've sort of cut out the relevant parts so you can see the chart anyway on the slide. So here we see the starting of the shamatha practice. We see the meditator down the bottom there, and in the meditator's left hand is the rope. That's a rope of mindfulness. That's symbolizing mindfulness. We're tying our mind with a rope of mindfulness to the object. And then the right hand is a hook, the hook of introspection. And so that is to hook the mind back. So the hook is symbolizing introspection. So these are the 2 tools we use in this practice. And we'll look at those in more detail. They're coming up in the text shortly. We'll look at that tomorrow morning. The elephant, again, is the mind. The black color is symbolizing the laxity, the dullness. The monkey is discursive thought. The black color is symbolizing this excitement, the most common form of distraction. And here at the first stage of practice, called directed attention, what we see is that the elephant and monkey are running wildly ahead of the meditator. And so what we notice at the first stage of practice is that our mind is completely out of control. that we try to focus on an object. Let's say it's the breath. We focus on the breath maybe for 2 or 3 seconds, and then we're distracted. Off we go on a story. And we often are distracted for long periods of time, maybe many minutes at a time. And then after some minutes, we go, oh, hang on, I'm supposed to be focusing on the breath. We come back to the breath again for another 2 or 3 seconds, and then off we go again on another story for another few minutes, and we come back again. And when this happens, we go, I can't meditate. I just can't meditate. In fact, I think I must be doing something wrong because since I've started meditating, my mind has gone completely out of control. Before it was sort of okay, but now it's completely out of control. I can't focus at all. So I can't meditate. I'm hopeless. I'm doing something wrong. If this is your experience, you can meditate. In fact, this is the first sign of progress in this practice, is to simply notice how chaotic and out of control our mind really is. If we've never sat down to do this sort of practice, to focus on an object in meditation single-pointedly, we may have this illusion that our mind is sort of okay, you know. Oh, I should be able to focus on the breath. That can't be too difficult. I might get a bit distracted, but I think I should be able to do that okay. And when we find we can't do it, we can hardly focus on the object at all, and we're distracted for long periods of time, that is our conclusion. So if this is your experience, good work. You're making progress. You've made it to step 1. Because step 1, directed attention, is when we can simply focus on the object for a second or 2. We've made it to step 1. And we do this through, again, hearing, through learning the instructions, what to do. What problems persist at this first stage? There's no attention or continuity of the object. We're completely distracted for long periods of time. We're hardly on the object at all. So the main imbalance we have here is, again, this coarse excitation, where we're completely distracted from the object, here for long periods of time. Now, the type of mental engagement we need to have here is what's called focused, meaning that we need to continue to refocus the mind again and again on the object, because we're mainly off the object. We're completely distracted. So that's what focused mental engagement is. We need to put a lot of effort to simply keep refocusing on the object. One other thing here, the flame. We see the flame on side of the path, and the flame represents the amount of effort we need in mindfulness and introspection. Now, our mindfulness and introspection are not very well developed, so we have to put a lot of effort to hold the object, a lot of effort to monitor that. But as we improve our mindfulness and introspection, as we move along these 9 stages, and they improve, then this flame gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Eventually, at the high levels of the path here, it eventually disappears completely, meaning that at the higher levels on the way to shamatha, now our mindfulness introspection is so well developed that it's effortless to be able to focus on the object. But here we need to put a lot of effort to start to develop mindfulness and introspection. But if we keep practicing, then through the power of reflecting, that is thinking about the practice, we understand it a bit better, we become a bit more enthusiastic, we'll be able to go around the bend in the road here and get to the second stage. And the second stage is called continuous attention. What we notice here is that the elephant and monkey are not running so fast anymore. Their mind is not quite as out of control as before. And there's a little bit of white on the top of the heads, and particularly on top of the elephant. And so this white is symbolizing this factor of stability and clarity, meaning that now we're able to focus a little bit better on the object. And so at stage 2, we may be able to focus on the object for up to a minute or 2. But still, when we get distracted, we tend to be distracted for long periods of time. So again, we're still more off the object than on the object. So that's what we achieve at this second stage. We can focus better. We can focus maybe up to a minute or 2. But what problems persist is we're still, most of the time, we're off the object. We're most of the time still distracted. So the main imbalance is still coarse excitation, and the mental engagement is still focused, meaning we still need to put a lot of effort to keep bringing the focus back to the object. But if we continue to practice, we'll go around the bend, and that's the power of mindfulness. And so through our mindfulness improving now, we'll be able to move on to stage 3 and 4. And so stage 3 here is called resurgent attention. Now here at stage 3 and 4, we see that mindfulness is getting a lot better. The rope of mindfulness is now tied to the elephant of the mind. And what we see here is now that the elephant is turning the head backwards, meaning that now at stage 3, not only can we focus on the object longer, up to maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the time, but now if we get distracted, we quickly recognize that and we quickly come back to the object. So that's symbolized with the elephant turning the head backwards. We quickly come back to the object. And we do this through the power of improved mindfulness. So what problems persist is, though, that we still occasionally get completely distracted for brief periods of time. So we still have that coarse excitation where we get completely distracted. But now the mental engagement is what's called interrupted, because now we're mainly on the object. And every now and again, our mind is interrupted by some level of laxity and excitation. That's what it means, interrupted. But now we see at stage 3, the rabbit has come into the picture on the back of the elephant. The rabbit is symbolizing subtle laxity. And so from stage 3 onwards, we need to start to pick up these more subtle levels of laxity, because if we don't, we'll get stuck. We won't be able to progress, because by stage 3, we're focusing well on the object. We're focusing maybe up to 5 or 10 minutes at a time. If we get distracted, we quickly come back to the object. And so we may have this idea that, wow, I think I'm very close to shamatha now already. But our clarity still needs a lot of work. Even though maybe we're focusing better on the object, there's still, mind is not very clear. And if we don't pick that up and refine that and get more and more clear in our attention, we'll get stuck here at these stages. So we need to pick up these subtle levels of laxity and start to deal with them from stage 3 onwards. And then if we continue to practice, we'll move to stage 4, which is called close attention. What we achieve here is now, through the power of mindfulness getting better and better, now we can focus on the object the entire session without ever completely losing it. So that's what we achieve through improved mindfulness. But now what problems can creep into our practice is some complacency regarding the practice, because now we can hold the object the entire session and we may think, well, I think I'm really very close to shamatha now, and we get complacent about the practice, but we still need a lot of work to do on the quality of our attention. We've hardly begun to really refine the quality of our attention. And so now the imbalances, we still have quite coarse laxity, quite a lot of sinking, but now the excitation is medium, meaning coarse excitation, we never get completely distracted again now. We hold the object, but now we have medium excitation where our mind is getting pulled away, but we're still holding on to the object a little bit in the corner of our mind. So again, our mental engagement, we're still interrupted by this coarse laxity and medium excitation. But stage 4 now, we really have a sense of accomplishment. We're no longer really a beginner in shamatha practice. We really feel that now we're really getting somewhere significant in our shamatha practice. That's where I'll leave it today. And then tomorrow we'll go on to looking at stages 5 through 9, and then actually how we achieve shamatha. So that will come tomorrow. And so we'll go back to the meditation, the shamatha practice that we're doing, the one of observing thoughts. But here, before we go to the meditation, a couple of points. First is this practice of observing the mind, observing thoughts. There's a number of analogies used to describe this practice. One very common analogy is the mind is like the sky and the thoughts are like the clouds moving through the sky. Another analogy that's often used is the mind is like an ocean and the thoughts are like the waves on the ocean. Or the mind is like a stage and thoughts are like actors on a stage. Or even using a more modern analogy, the mind is like a screen and the movie on the screen is, the thoughts are like the movie on the screen. So what we can see here from these analogies is this idea of foreground and background, that the background is the mind itself, the space of the mind, And then the foreground is all the mental events that arise in that space. So when we're observing the mind, we have three aspects actually. We have the background, the space of the mind, plus the foreground, all the mental events that arise in that space. And these mental events that arise in the mind come in sort of two flavors. There are the more what's called objective mental events. They're more discrete. They're more things like thoughts, memories, mental images. They're more objective in nature. And then you have the more subjective mental events, things like desires, emotions, mental afflictions, and so forth. And these more subjective mental events, because they're sort of closer to us in terms of being more subjective in nature, therefore they're often harder to notice. For example, let's say we're observing the mind and there's nothing there, and we're getting frustrated because there's nothing there, then we often don't notice the frustration because it's so close to us. It's more subjective than objective. And so these subjective mental events often come in the form of reactions to objective mental events. So, for example, some image or memory comes up, maybe it's unpleasant, and when we react to that, we have some aversion to that, or some frustration, or something arising, or some craving arising, and we don't tend to notice it so much. And so what we're going to do in this meditation now is, again, we're going to observe the space of the mind. So the space of the mind is a space within which all of these mental events arise, abide, and dissolve back into. But in particular, we're going to pay close attention to the more subjective mental events. That is, things like emotions, mental afflictions, and in particular, any reactions to anything pleasant or unpleasant that arises in our mind, to pay close attention to this, because we often miss them. And they're the ones that really often get us into a lot of trouble, our reactions to things. So we're going to emphasize that in this meditation. So again, same meditation as before, observing space of the mind, whatever mental events arise in that space, but again, paying close attention and really emphasizing subjective mental events, particularly any reactions to anything pleasant or unpleasant that arises. And as before, let your gaze be vacant. And again, if you find your mind getting agitated, tense, distracted, lower the gaze. If you're falling into dullness, laxity, elevate the gaze. That'll help a little bit. And as before, if you find that you're getting constantly swept up in your thoughts, emotions, and so forth, then you can experiment with anchoring in the breath, really just focusing on particularly the rhythm of the breath, because that's good for relaxation. Have that as your main object. And then just a little bit in the corner of the mind, notice any thoughts or emotions or so forth going on. So that's where we can start. That will really anchor us well. And then once we get comfortable there and we start to be able to do that fairly well, then we can shift it a bit. We can start to focus more on the mental events and less on the breath, and then eventually let go of the breath. And so in that way, we can anchor ourselves in the breath and then eventually slowly let go of that anchor and eventually just observe the thoughts and emotions. And again, anytime you're just getting constantly swept up, go back and anchor yourself again in the breath. So use that breath really as an anchor point to help us to get into this practice. So let's do that practice now. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. Establishing a good posture, back straight and body relaxed. And having set up a good posture, keeping the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement that would just cause distraction. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And preparing the mind, setting it into a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Allowing your eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And then bring your attention to your own mind and observe your own mind and whatever is arising in the space of the mind. Without following thoughts, without trying to get rid of thoughts. Simply observing thoughts and other mental events as they arise and pass. And in this meditation, in particular, emphasizing the more subjective mental events, paying very close attention to any emotions that arise, any mental afflictions, any reactions to anything pleasant or unpleasant that is arising. If you find that you've got caught up in a thought or an emotion and got carried away, then the first thing to do is relax. Then release grasping onto that thought or emotion, and then very gently return to observing the mind. So relax, release, and return. Keep coming back to the mind again and again. Each time you get caught up in a distraction, caught up in a thought or an emotion. And if you're becoming frustrated at not being able to observe your thoughts, observe that frustration. Or if you're becoming bored with the practice, observe that boredom. Whatever is arising, observe it. And we can bring the meditation to a close. We have some time for question answer now. So again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. You have any questions there, Shia?
Yes, we have a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
First from Elisheva. She says, it's difficult for me to recognize thoughts. Any advice?
Difficult to recognize thoughts. Does that mean to clearly see thoughts? Or I'm not sure what exactly the question is asking. But one of the most common experiences that we have when we begin this practice is that we sit down and we watch. And as we saw in the shamatha chart, the first stage of progress is we sit down and we watch. And then before we know it, we're off, we're gone, off on a story. And we don't recognize that we're gone until the end of the story. We go, oh, hang on, I'm supposed to be watching this, not following some story. And then we let go and we come back. So initially, because our strong habit in our modern world is if some thought or emotion comes up, we latch hold of it and off we go. And so that's what's going to happen in meditation. We'll get swept away constantly. And so as we saw then, if that's the case, and that's the case for many people when they try to do this practice, it's very difficult to observe thoughts because we just get caught up in them all the time. We only notice a thought after we've sort of got distracted and let go of the thought, then we notice it. But that's okay, that's where we start. And as a way to get into this practice, as I mentioned, what can be very helpful is to anchor ourselves in the breath, particularly the rhythm of the breath, even to the point where we begin by mainly focusing on the rhythm of the breath, have that as our main focus, and just a little bit in the corner of the mind, noticing any thoughts there, just a little bit, and then shifting that emphasis over time. And so that way we can use the breath to anchor ourselves to get into the practice. Another thing that is happening in often when we begin this practice, we sit down and we watch and suddenly there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And generally that's not because as a beginner, the mind has suddenly gone quiet. Probably the most common reason for that is that, like everything in our life, we've brought a lot of tension to it because we feel like if I don't pay very close attention, I'm just going to get swept away in my thoughts. So we pay so much close attention that we actually tense, we clamp down, focusing tightly on the object, on the mind rather. And so then what we're doing is we're suffocating the mind. There's no space for any thoughts to arise. And so therefore, if we notice we have tense focus, we need to relax that, relax that, relax that. So that's very common. And another reason is that our mind is not very clear. For example, if you've done the focusing on the breath at the entrance of the nostrils, when you began that practice, you probably didn't notice any sensations there at all. That's not because there's no sensations there. It's because our mind is not very clear. So similarly, when we sit down and we look at the mind, we don't notice anything. Another reason for that is our mind is quite dull, meaning that there is probably a lot of mental activity going on there, but it's below the level of our threshold, of our radar. And so therefore we need to just pay closer attention without tensing, to sharpen our focus without tensing, to pay closer attention. Another common experience is that we sit down and we look and then we go, there's no thoughts here. What's going on? There's no thoughts here. Normally my mind is full of thoughts, but now my mind has gone completely quiet. I think I must be doing this practice wrong. I'm definitely doing it wrong because I can't see any thoughts now. Nothing's going on. These are all thoughts. This all thoughts. So just watch all of that. Or we're sitting down there and we're watching and there's nothing there and we're confused or we're frustrated or we're disappointed. So all of these are mental events. Being confused, being bored, being frustrated, being irritated, this is all mental events. So just observe that. That is thought. And so what you'll find is that this is the normal experience as a beginner, that it's often this practice is explained as watch thoughts as they arise and pass. And so people think, okay, I'll sit down, here will come a thought, there's the thought, there it is, there it goes. That's not going to happen. Because actually, if we are very closely paying attention, something will start to rise, it'll go, it'll go on, because we're not feeding it. It's only when we feed thoughts, that's why they can stick around. So it's not like thoughts will arise, they'll be there for a few seconds, we'll watch them very nicely, and then they'll slowly dissipate. That's not going to happen. So either one of two things, either the thought will come, we'll get hot, we'll grab it, we'll follow it, and we get caught up and lost. Or if we're actually watching, something will come, but because our mind is not so clear, we can't really clearly see what it is. There's sort of something sort of there, and then it's gone. That's okay, good. That's where we start. Just keep doing that, keeping that on the basis of relaxation. And as our mind becomes more stable, we'll get less caught up. And as our mind becomes more clear, we'll be able to more clearly identify those mental events, what they are. So this will take time, so that's okay.
Thank you. Question from Mati. Coming back to the mind, what or where is the mind?
What or where is the mind? This is what we're going to look at next weekend in Vipassana. This is exactly the sort of question in Vipassana practice. Shamatha practice is bare attention, meaning we're simply observing the object directly. Vipassana practice is we're questioning what we're observing. So if in this practice we're observing the mind and we suddenly go, where's the mind? What is the mind? This, we've now gone into Vipassana practice. So if that question comes up, where is the mind? Just observe that thought, the thought that goes, where is the mind? Just observe that. Don't try to answer it, because if you try and answer it, you've already gone into Vipassana practice. So we do shamatha when we do shamatha. So if these sorts of thoughts come up, what is the mind? Where is the mind? Just simply observe that thought itself. Watch it arise and pass. That's shamatha. Later in Vipassana practice, next weekend, we'll actually ask those questions. Where is the mind? What is the mind? And then on the basis of that question, we look, we search for the mind. But that's Vipassana. That's coming next weekend.
Okay, thank you. A question from Varda. I have the book Mahamudra by the ninth Karmapa Wang Chong Dorje.
Dispelling the darkness of ignorance, I think, or something it's called. Yeah. So the question is what?
Will it help or distract me to read this?
What we're following in this 2 weekends is the Guluk Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra. And so it's a synthesis we saw from Tsongkhapa of his classic emptiness plus oral instructions from the Kagyu. So if you read a book like that from the ninth Karmapa, that's coming purely from Kagyu. And so you will find some parallels there, but also some differences in the practice. But that sort of book, I think, can be very helpful, because that book is very well written. And so that will give you a very good overview of the Mahamudra practice as it's practiced within the Kagyu tradition. And so that will help then understand where this Gelug Kagyu tradition is really coming from. So it won't be exactly the same, but it will help to have a deeper understanding of what we're doing here, because there is a lot of overlap.
Thank you. Last question from Mati. In moments of feeling great joy during meditation, as a consequence of mind expansion, what line can be drawn in order to realize whatever we are on the right path? Whether we are on the right path.
So there's something,
Again,
can you read the question again? Something about great joy, and then I lost the last bit.
moment, in moments of feeling great joy during meditation, as a consequence of mind expansion, what line can be drawn?
What line
Can be
can be
drawn
drawn?
in order to realize whether we are on the right path?
Okay. Good question. Joy is one of the inner qualities of mind. And so in the shamatha practice, as we touch on to the more subtle level of mind, not only will our mind become more stable and clear, but you'll find a lot of joy arising. But that joy is not arising due to some sort of stimulus. It's not like we have some appearance and then we get joy from the appearance. So this is coming from with the mind itself. And the key is to not get caught up in craving and attachment. In fact, the meditation texts on shamatha warn the meditator about these experiences, because not only will we have some experiences of crystal clarity, but also a lot of joy in the mind being very still and open and spacious. These are experiences that we will start to experience as even in the shamatha practice, as we go deeper into the practice. And the meditation texts warn the meditator about them because they're so seductive, because it's easy to go, wow, that's so nice, that experience. I want that. And we end up with craving and attachment. And that craving and attachment, of course, will cause that experience to immediately vanish. And then we go, oh, I need to recreate that. That was so nice. And we use, with craving and attachment, we try to recreate that experience. And of course, we won't be able to, and we'll get frustrated, more frustrated. So the key is to understand that these experiences of stillness, non-conceptuality, clarity, joy, and bliss are signposts that our practice is going in the right direction. And rather than getting caught up in craving and attachment for them, use them to go deeper. Because if our mind is joyful, clear, still, open, that is the perfect state of mind to go deeper and deeper into the shamatha practice, to go further and further in shamatha practice. So use it for that purpose, rather than just going, oh, that's nice, I want that, and try to hold on to it. That's just going to destroy the practice. So just let go of that attachment, and then everything will be fine. These experiences, they'll come and they'll go. When they're there, use them. If they're not there, that's okay as well. It doesn't matter. Okay, that's it. We've run out of time. So let's, again, before we run away, let's dedicate all of our efforts here today using this Shantideva dedication prayer. So again, while I read out the verses from Shantideva, you might like to reflect on the words, this dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Tomorrow, we'll continue with the shamatha practice. Quite a lot to go on in that practice. And in terms of the meditation, we'll continue a little bit with the observing thoughts, but also we'll move into the second variation of shamatha practice in Mahamudra, and that is the resting in awareness shamatha practice. So that's the meditation that also we'll do quite a lot of tomorrow. And then we'll continue on in terms of the text, in terms of how to focus the mind, how to sustain the practice, what are the results of the practice, and then the actual goal of achieving shamatha. And we'll continue that using that 9-stage model to look at the last 5 stages and also how to actually achieve the goal of shamatha. So that's all coming tomorrow. So until then, enjoy the rest of the day, and we'll see you same time tomorrow morning. So bye for now.
Bye everyone, see you tomorrow. Thank you very much, Glen.
Thank you so much.